Star Wars only, I don't know what the fuck your problem is.
Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy and Vice President of Development over there at Lucasfilm, Michelle Rejoin, both did an interview with io9gizmodo.com, and they talk about the sequel trilogy and kind of the planning and thoughts that went into the sequel trilogy. And here's what IO9 asked them. They asked, when you made The Force Awakens, obviously there was some discussion about where this could all go. Rian Johnson then came in and took the story in his direction, and now J.J. Abrams is back to finish everything up. Looking back, was there a reason why the beats of the entire trilogy weren't cemented around Episode 7, and has a lack of structure been a benefit in retrospect? And Kathleen Kennedy says, well, first of all, when we sat down to do The Force Awakens, we spent a great deal of time working out all three movies and doing a real deep dive on the previous 6 and talking about that, understanding the mythology that George Lucas had created, bringing in people who had worked on those films, been a part of Lucasfilm. We brought in 2 or 3 writers. There were 8 of us? Usually sitting in that room and whiteboarding what possibilities are and looking at character arcs, identifying. Because George had already gone to Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and Mark Hamill to do the film, so we knew that that was a given. That we were bringing them back into the trilogy and we're introducing new characters so we have a sense of where this is going. But the important thing is, I like to look at the first 3 movies that George did where he had different directors. He was really serving as a producing role in that, and we were doing a similar kind of thing, which is identifying genre and really allowing a filmmaker, and in the case of JJ and Ryan, huge Star Wars fans, and allowing them to get immersed, to find a center of the story, and then make it their own. It's obviously important, as George has always said, to have meaning in these movies, and as a director, I think every director should have something to say in what is they're trying to do, and they need to find what's personal for them. In addition to do something like Star Wars, which has this incredible fan base that cares so deeply, that wants to believe that we're as immersed in the process as they are, that we're looking at the nuances and the importance of mythology as they are, I can tell you that that's absolutely what goes on. It's endless conversations along those lines. So you say cemented, I don't think anything's ever cemented with Star Wars. It can't be. It's so rich with possibility that you don't want to reach to a point where you think you've made a decision and then not leave yourself open to exploring other possibilities and other considerations. When you get a lot of smart people in a room who are all Star Wars fans, that's never going to stop. And I've certainly found in the 7 years now that we've been doing that that's what makes this so fun. As we add people to the family, those voices become important voices to the creative process. And Michelle Rejoin says, and I say in this movie in particular, had such a tremendous challenge in synthesizing not only the one trilogy, but 9 films, the whole saga, and to deliver a sense of not only emotional satisfaction, but inevitability while retaining that feeling of surprise as well. It was of the utmost importance to us from the very beginning, and that was part of why this movie was so challenging, because you're bringing all those threads to a great conclusion. All those character arcs that have been from 1977 and beyond, so we feel it delivers that satisfaction, we hope. Wow, that was a lot to get through, but let's talk about the planning, I guess, or lack thereof, for the sequel trilogy. And it seems like what they were going for, Lucasfilm, when they sat down, once they got Disney taking them over and saying, hey, you need to make a brand new trilogy of Star Wars films, episodes 7, 8, and 9. The idea was, let's look at the 2 trilogies that we've had in the past. You got the prequel trilogy, and you got the original trilogy. Now, I think everyone and their mother knows that when you're planning out the episodes 7, 8, and 9 for the Star Wars franchise, and you have to look at the past 2 trilogies that were there prior to this trilogy, the question is, which one do you mimic more? Do you mimic the prequel trilogy, which was written and directed by one man and had a big backlash to it? Or do you go off the original trilogy, which was a lot more successful and had a lot better reactions to it, where you had many different directors, many different writers, and people producing that trilogy? I think the options and the choice is pretty clear. You would go for the original trilogy. And so I like the fact that they were doing that. And they make a good point, or at least Kathleen does, when she says that not everything's cemented in the Star Wars universe. I mean, when George Lucas was writing the original drafts for Star Wars, it was constantly changing, even into production. I mean, Jesus, I got a book over here that's got like probably 30 different versions of the script for the original trilogy alone. When it comes to the prequels, even when it came to Attack of the Clones, George Lucas was saying there's a part where he's like, oh, I gotta get started on the script soon. And like, you were into production. What do you mean you gotta get started on the script soon? So it's proof in the pudding like that, where Star Wars isn't always cemented into planning and into having the story thought out from beginning to end from the word go. The big problem with the sequel trilogy, though, is that they didn't bring in all the directors and writers at the beginning to get the story grounded and see where they wanted to start and finish it. I'm pretty confident the people who were there, the 8 people that Kathleen Kennedy is talking about, had some outlines of where we want the story to start and end, And that's probably some of the reasons why Colin Trevorrow left when he was brought in for episode 9 of he wasn't there for those conversations, so he's not really in on that story and the ideas that went into that. Which is unfortunate because it's one of those things where it's like, if you're going to make 3 films, and you know they're going to come out in 2015, 2017, and 2019, if that's the case, I feel like you should get someone to either work on all 3 of them, like a writer like Lawrence Kasdan. They had Michael Arden in for The Force Awakens, and then they brought in Jack Thorne for episode 9, and Derek Connolly and Colin Trevorrow for episode 9 as well. And now we got J.J. Abrams co-writing with Chris Terrio for episode 9, and J.J. and Lawrence Kasdan co-wrote The Force Awakens. You have a lot of people going in and out of the story for the sequel trilogy, and that's where I feel like it has not felt cemented on the planning. And the interviewer makes a good point when they ask about, hey, why does this not feel so cemented? Why does the episode 8 that we see, The Last Jedi, feel a lot different compared to episode 7? Because, I mean, if you look at episode 9 at least, even from the trailers alone, it feels like it relates a little bit more to episode 7 than episode 8 does. Episode 8 just feels like a complete departure from everything that was set up in episode 7, and I think, at least in my personal opinion, that's just a lack of proper planning. But I understand if Kathleen Kennedy's trying to do what George Lucas did in the original trilogy, and really only serve as a producer and let your writers and directors kind of decide how the story goes, that does make sense, and that is a good strategy to go for. However, if you're influencing those decisions, if you're having writers go in and out of the trilogy constantly, if you're having new people come in as directors, the story that you were looking for and planning for is going to get muddied up a little bit. And that's clearly what happened here. And I remember thinking that J.J. Abrams was coming into episode 9 because he had more creative freedom and could do kind of the story the way he wanted to do. And it seems like that's the case, but there was some information that I had gotten in April when I was at Star Wars Celebration that really led me to believe that. But then later on, I asked people who were on set, like, how involved was Kathleen Kennedy, and they were like, yeah, she's there every day watching dailies. And so it was kind of like, well, that idea of mine kind of went out the window. But this last little part kind of touches on that, where Kathleen Kennedy talks about the strategy going into this film and the conversations that she had with, J.J. Abrams and other people at Lucasfilm. Here's what they say. Yeah, we weren't afraid to say, no, I don't see it. Here's what I have a problem with. This isn't quite landing. We were all just very honest with one another because we recognized how important it was. And I feel really fortunate to have certain people inside Lucasfilm that really, really know Star Wars far more deeply than I pretend to, and I think they sat at the feet of George Lucas for a long time. They fundamentally understand what was always very important to him in terms of defining this mythology and understanding this mythology, and it's important to have those voices weigh in as well, as we did equally with Pablo Hidalgo and Dave Filoni. But it's not, I've heard some people say sometimes, well, isn't that just a committee approach? And it's not. I've worked as a producer in film my entire career, and I've always considered myself a voice in the room, but it's not my ultimate decision. It's a decision of the director, ultimately. And your job is to serve up as many curated possibilities that they can choose from, work with, see if it's going to fit in the mosaic of storytelling, and then arrive at a point of view to move forward. And I think we had a great working relationship with JJ on this to really arrive at something that we all felt was emotionally meaningful and satisfying. And I think, knock on wood, that the fans are going to feel that, and they're going to feel listened to. I think that's always been an important thing to Lucasfilm, is the fans are every bit as important to us as what any of us do. And I hope they feel that way. They seem to be feeling that way with The Mandalorian, and she's right on that last part. And so if you look at how they made the sequel trilogy, I know this is a long video and I do apologize about that, but this is a fun topic in my opinion. They made the sequel trilogy and allowed certain directors to have a lot more creative freedom. Force Awakens was definitely geared towards the nostalgic factor, and that was a decision made by Disney. Bob Iger specifically. I know he was heavily involved with Alan Horn on the making of Episode 7. And so when it comes to Episode 8, Lucasfilm seemed to have a little more freedom from Disney and gave all that freedom to Rian Johnson. Because Kathleen Kennedy is a big Rian Johnson fan. I mean, she was looking at him to do a Star Wars movie from the word go. From the second they announced the sequel trilogy, I'm pretty confident she had him in mind because she likes him as a director. And so when they brought Rian Johnson in, they kind of gave him that entire film and let him write and direct it all by himself. Which, hey, I mean, I'm okay with certain directors writing and directing their own films, but when you're doing a Star Wars trilogy, I feel like it needs to have a little bit more collaboration. And Rian Johnson was in total complete control of that film. Now we get to Episode 9, and it still is a collaborative effort between people like Chris Terrio, J.J. Abrams, and the producers that you have involved with the film, like Kathleen Kennedy and Michelle Rejwan. but it ultimately relies on J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio and their decisions in the film and how they're doing the film. And so I like the idea that they're actually going to people like Pablo Hidalgo and Dave Filoni for the story ideas in Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. I know the writer Chris Terrio talked about how he had Pablo Hidalgo on speed dial. Shout out to Pablo, he called me a chud on Twitter a few months ago, that was fun. But anyways, Pablo Hidalgo has a lot of vast knowledge in the Star Wars universe, and Chris Terrio was constantly calling him and saying, hey, does this story idea work? Does this make sense? Is this stupid as I think it is? Or something like that. And that's good to hear, because that means they're not just going into it like a bubble. If you remember one of the interviews that Rian Johnson did for The Last Jedi was it was funny listening to him compared to J.J. Abrams, where J.J. Abrams was like, I don't want to put myself in a bubble and just, go into this kind of blindly. And then like Rian Johnson, when making The Last Jedi, he was like, what we did was put ourselves in a bubble and, we weren't thinking about what others were saying and stuff like that. And so it's nice to hear in this interview that Kathleen Kennedy and Michelle Reyes-Wan are saying that they're listening to fans. I know people are gonna, refute that all fucking day, but I mean, either you're gonna take their word or they're not. You can't just say everything they say is a lie simply because you don't like these people, my friends. I mean, let's just be honest here. You gotta give people benefit of the doubt from time to time. And so they say they're listening to fans. They say they're trying to think of what the fans would like in this film, but also not. You don't want to adhere to everything that the fans would want as well. You want to do something different. You want to do something new. And I'm hoping that they actually made a good movie here. And it feels like this movie is really going to fall on the shoulders of J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio if they really got the creative freedom that Michelle Reyes-Wan and Kathleen Kennedy are hinting at that they got. And Michelle Reyes-Wan was there for Episode 7. She was one of the producers on that one, and she's also one of the producers on Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. And I'll admit, I like The Force Awakens a lot more than I like The Last Jedi, so I feel like if The Force Awakens can kind of do the same thing, but better, and not really do so much nostalgia stuff, and kind of go off of the story that was building, I may enjoy Episode 9 a lot more than I enjoy The Last Jedi. My big problem with The Last Jedi compared to The Force Awakens was that it took everything that I feel like The Force Awakens was building on, like the reveal of Luke Skywalker, like Rey's parents, and Snoke, and all that stuff, and it took all that and just kind of said, fuck you, we're gonna go do something else. And hey, you want to make a unique movie, Rian Johnson, you do that. I just fundamentally disagree with almost every choice you made in that film. So I'm interested to see where The Rise of Skywalker goes. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I think JJ having Chris Terrio involved as a co-writer is interesting to say the least. I'm not sure how this will go. I'm excited to see Palpatine back. But yeah, I'm a little nervous this isn't going to give me the ending that I'm hoping for. But hearing that they were consulting people like Pablo Hidalgo, Dave Filoni, and others at Lucasfilm, and they were allowing JJ and Chris Terrio to kind of have a lot of the freedom that they should get, it gives me a little bit more hope, admittedly. And I know the comment sections on this video is just going to be absolutely fantastic because Star Wars fans, if anything, love them some Kathleen Kennedy interviews. So tell me your thoughts below about this interview with Kathleen Kennedy and the Vice President of Development, Michelle Reyes-Wan, over there at Lucasfilm, and what your thoughts are on The Rise of Skywalker going into it, 2-3 weeks out now? Now we're like 2 weeks out. Time's a-ticking. Star Wars only. Hope you guys enjoyed this long video. I'll see you guys next time, and may the Force be with you always.